Alright everyone, now we've got to have a dedicated video. I'll try to keep this one a little bit short since it's quite important. On the flip side of the censorship issue with regards to the internet, I've alluded to it, but I haven't made its own video for the purposes of people who, otherwise, maybe they didn't pay attention in the last ones or something like that. Want to share it out, keep it short and pithy. This is the flip side of corporate censorship online. Mostly what people have been complaining about up until now, most of what they've said, it comes from content creators who are tired of being abused. Someone like me, I primarily am a content creator, not a content absorber. I'm the one that makes videos, writes books, things like that. So when I talk about censorship, it's typically from the perspective of someone who's directly impacted on that level, as in, I could be prevented from distributing the content I wish to distribute that I want other people to have access to. But there's the important point. There's a whole huge group of people who don't create content or don't, they're not really major creators. Maybe they made a YouTube video, but they don't do it like regularly. They're not trying to make it a major thing. It's just maybe a minor hobby of theirs or whatever. They've got like 2 videos up. Or they do a blog, but only a little bit. They're not really a blogger. Or they make music, but it's just sort of a side project, like a garage band thing. They're not really a creator of music. They're not a musician. Most people fall into the category of not content creators. The way in which censorship affects them, therefore, is fundamentally different. For them, it's primarily the censorship lovers, the jackbootlickers, the so-called activists of modernity, the so-called progressives. They're not really, but that's what they call themselves usually. They want to rob 99% of people, not of the ability to make content, because they're not really making content, but of the ability to peruse and absorb content. And so that's an understanding that people need to come to, number one, and number two, stress. Don't just tell your fans, hey, my stuff might, you might not be able to get it anymore or something. No, remind them that they're fundamentally being violated as well. They're being told by a half a dozen corporations, really, and a bunch of people goading them on, that there are certain things that they're not mature enough to handle. They're not allowed to hear that edgy political opinion. They're not allowed to peruse this individual. They're wrong-think, they're bad or bigoted or something. And in some cases, those labels have lost all meaning. It was interesting when I was watching PewDiePie's last video, and he was saying what I said some time ago, which was interesting, and presumably coincidental, talking about, hey, when you stretch the term racism or anti-Semitism or bigotry or whatever, when you stretch it out, it becomes less effective. Fundamentally, at some point, it's perfectly useless. It no longer means anything. Most people are then covered under the umbrella. Like, let's say you take racism to mean people who are actually hateful. That is, that they're demonstrably, their actions change around people based on their race, based on their skin color, real or perceived ethnicity or something. That they're abusive. They use abusive language. They just don't like people who are of another race or certain races. Now let's say you stretch it, that's a small group of people, the number that do that. Now let's say you stretch it a little further and say, okay, people have those views but don't outwardly act like that. They might talk about it a little bit, but they don't, they're not going to go out there, they're not going to shoot up a black church or something. Then it's a few more people. Now let's say, though, that any time you disagree with someone politically, and this has been what's happening, and they happen to be of a different race, you immediately assume that they're a racist. And this happens on the right, too. There are plenty of times they don't like some black commentators, a liberal says something they don't like. Oh, well, they're just racist against white people. So now you've spread the term so thinly over such a wide area, most of the population's there. If you have any political views at all, you've probably been called a bigot. I've been called a bigot. I was asked to give examples when I was debating a little bit with the Sleeping Giants the other day. I was asked by one of the people there that I'm assuming is a leftist. Well, can you give some examples of people being like, slandered with, the bigot and stuff? I'm like, yeah, me. It happens all the time. It happens constantly. Because people who don't like my political views, they don't even know anything really about me. None of these people are presumably regular purveyors of my material. They just assume that that's the case. They've been told it. They infer it from some political belief they do know that I have. Like, hey, he thinks that having a border wall is a good idea. Therefore, he must also be a virulent Christian, gun toter, like really, really loves guns, probably homophobic. He must be like a total zealot, basically. Now, none of these other things are true, but they infer that because of a general set of stereotypes. The problem is that because of the thinness of spreading of terms like racist, bigot, sexist, homophobe, and so forth, far left, far right, whatever, you're a commie, you're a Nazi, you're literally Hitler. Because of that, content creators are constantly getting fucked in the ass. If they have any political views, and sometimes even when they don't. Again, we see people who don't even regularly talk about political issues getting tarred and feathered by groups like Vox or The Verge and so forth. The Verge emerging as a new group that's, engaged in what amounts to slander on a regular basis. Some of it is tabloid clickbait. Some of it is literally economically driven. It's like, hey, we antagonize this person with 80 million subscribers. We're probably going to get more ad revenue because a lot of people will be looking at the article. By the way, remember to archive everything. It's a wonderful time. The censorship lovers, therefore, for most people, they want to control what you can absorb, not what you can make, because you're not a content creator. It's an interesting way of thinking about things. I just thought that bore out some mentioning. That's about all. Peace out.